I'm glad everybody could be out here this morning with us. The title of my sermon this morning is, Who's on First? And if you remember back in the day, you're dating yourself if you actually say that you remember this, but there was a skit done by Abbott and Costello, and it was very funny. I even went online, and after I got the idea for this sermon, I don't know where I got it, but after I found it, I went ahead and went online and I watched that whole thing again, and it was very, very enjoyable and funny. But one thing I noticed that there was one place that Abbott, Costello, I think Costello was a little guy, I think. I might got him mixed up, but whichever, the little guy, he was going to say a swear word, and instead of saying that swear word, he said darn. And I thought to myself, you know, I'm looking at this, and this is the way TV started out. It was none of that on it. But now, comedy has to be either vulgar or gross to be funny. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little bit sick of it. But with that said, it was a skit that was really funny because of the way it was laid out. I don't know who did it, but who was on first? We already know who was on first. Who, that was his name, who. But the other guy couldn't get it. And we know that what was on second, and we know I don't know was on third. But the way it all panned out was who was on second. And our scripture reading this morning is from Exodus 20, 1 through 3. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. The saying in the world is, second place is okay if you like being first in a long line of losers. And we make God feel like a loser when we put him second place in our hearts. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. It doesn't matter who's in the number one position in our lives, but until we settle that matter with the idea that God is going to be that number one position, then our life is going to be all joy and everything else, right? No, that's not the promise. The promise is what we're going to get when we go up there. That's the promise. Everybody gets that mixed up. They think, well, I'm a Christian now, so nothing bad should ever happen to me. That's not what's going to happen. God showed us in the first commandment of the Bible that he was not going to settle for being second. He had to be first. God's requirements are that you shall have no other gods before me. And that also was carried over into the New Testament in Matthew 27, 37 through 38, when Jesus said himself, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the great commandment. God requires, his requirements are very simple. He demands to be first place in every area of our life. He knows that all men must have a God of some sort, and he demands that it's him. In Exodus 34:14, it tells us that God is a jealous God, and God alone is worthy of our love and devotion. Him alone. Some would ask, well, isn't there only one God? Well, yes would be the answer to that. There is only one true God, but there are many false gods. Alan Redpath said, our God is the thing or person which we think most precious, for whom we would make the greatest sacrifice, and who moves our heart with warmest love. He is the person or thing that if lost would leave us desolate. And Martin Luther said, whatever we make the most of is our God. And I'm not standing before you this morning professing to put God first in everything, because I'm a human being and so are you. We're human, and sometimes God kind of gets pushed back to the back because sometimes we're going through troubles and sometimes we're going through trials. But that's when we need to elevate God to the pinnacle and have Him in our life all the time. Have you noticed how we elevate some things to the status of a god? It may be the godhood in our lives. Let's look up some of these gods. The god of pleasure is found in Philippians 3:18 and 19. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, who ends in destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. It's awful hard not to set your mind on earthly things. And those earthly things could include sensual, sexual, sports, entertainment, possessions, etc., etc., etc. Just the list goes on and on and on. And remember one thing, that pleasure is like a drug. Today in our world with so many drug overdoses, we find out that pleasure is like a drug. It often requires more to get the same effect. So the more we get, the more we want, and we can't get off of it. Hebrews 11:25. Choosing rather to suffer afflictions with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. And then the second point I want to go over this morning is the god of possessions. The gift of greed dominates many lives. People who place money and things first are adulterers. And in Matthew 6:24 it says, you cannot serve God and riches. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And even on our money it says, in God we trust. But should it say, in this God we trust? Because sometimes that's what we do. The question is, do we trust in God or do we trust in money and possessions? And then the third one is the god of personal worth. Who in this room just wants people to think of you as nothing? Nobody raised their hand. Everybody wants to be worth something to somebody. When a person feels that the world revolves around them, though, and that they must always come out on top, that person is an adulterer. It tells us in Mark 8:36, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And if you really read into that verse, what on earth here is worth losing your eternity, your soul for? Stop and think about it. And then the fourth one is the god of plans and projects. Anything that occupies the mind and life ahead of God is an idol. And I have to go back to the story of the rich farmer when he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And we know what God said to him in verse 20. He called him a fool. I always tease my one buddy. He moved away from his big house and his big garage, but he kept building onto the garage because his kids like to work on cars. I love a big garage myself. I had a big one. My garage was actually bigger than my house when I had my garage. But the idea is, what emphasis do you put on that? And what emphasis is that a part of your life? God called him a fool. This list is practically endless. We could turn, man is an expert in turning everything into a god. Everything into something that, I want that so bad, I would do anything to have that. But we should feel that way about heaven. We should feel that way about heaven. I will do whatever it takes to make it to heaven. If we conduct a poll this morning and ask each person here in this room to name the person or the thing that dominates their life, what would the answer be? Whatever it is, that thing or person is your God. Now we'll go over some of God's reasons. And this is found in verse 2 of our text. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. God could make this demand of Israel because he was the one that paid the price. He was the one that brought them out of Egypt. He had purchased them unto himself, and they were his. He chose them, he loved them, he delivered them and blessed them. Therefore, they owed him absolute reverence and worship. How much more do we owe for the blood-bought church that we're a member of right now? Jesus paid that